On the grainy black and white feed of a security camera, the silence of a Sunday evening in East Ardsley, West Yorkshire, is broken by frantic, purposeful movement. It is the kind of footage that chillingly captures the exact moment a line is crossed from lawful citizen to violent criminal. The timestamp reads just past 6:00 p.m, and on the screen, 53-year-old farmer Richard Bathie is sprinting across his yard. He is not tending to livestock or checking fences. He is running toward a massive, yellow, JCB telehandler with the urgency of a soldier under fire. He climbs into the cab, the diesel engine roaring to life as he aggressively backs the heavy machine out into the yard. Moments later, his 18-year-old son, Joshua, emerges from the farmhouse. He is not carrying a toolkit but a double-barreled shotgun, a weapon legally held on the property for pest control, now repurposed for a much darker intent. Standing nearby is their cousin, Shaun McDermott. Phones in their pockets have been buzzing incessantly for the last hour, texts flying back and forth about who got bottled, who got smashed, and what needs to be done to settle the score. In less than 60 minutes from this recording, these three men will drive that JCB and a white Mercedes flatbed van into a small, family-run caravan site in Tingley. They will use the heavy machinery to trap their rivals inside a cage of steel and glass. They will terrorize women and children, smash property, and discharge that shotgun into two men at point-blank range. But, to understand why a respected farming family would launch a paramilitary-style raid on a residential park, we have to rewind the clock. The fuse for this explosion of violence was lit just hours earlier, amidst the balloons and cake of a family celebration. The seeds of the carnage were sown on Sunday, August 8, 2021, within the tight-knit but fractured community of West Yorkshire. The Bathie family was hosting a christening celebration at the Hanging Heaton Golf Club in Dewsbury. It was supposed to be a day of joy, bringing together relatives and friends. Among the guests was 28-year-old Patrick Doran, a resident of the Tingley Caravan Park. His presence, however, was a source of friction. Prosecutors would later suggest he was a notable guest, a polite way of saying he was not entirely welcome. There were whispers of bad blood between the land-owning Bathie farmers and the travelling community residing at Tingley, a simmering feud that had been kept at a low boil for years. As the drinks flowed and the afternoon wore on, the veneer of civility cracked. Around 4:30 p.m, the tension snapped. Richard Bathie, the host and patriarch, reportedly flew into a rage upon hearing a rumour that Doran was messing with white powder in the club toilets. To Richard, the implication that a guest had brought drugs to his family's christening was the ultimate disrespect. Whether it was the alleged drugs, or simply Doran getting lippy and mouthing off, the verbal sparring quickly spilled into the car park. CCTV from the club captured the moment Richard removed his jacket, a universal signal that talking was over. He marched toward Doran and began pummeling him. It was not a fair fight. Joshua Bathie and Shaun McDermott jumped in, turning it into a 3-on-1 beatdown. Doran was overwhelmed, kicked and punched as the brawl spilled onto the road. Bruised and humiliated, Patrick Doran fled the scene, but as he wiped the blood from his face, his mind was already racing with thoughts of payback. By roughly 5:00 p.m. that afternoon, the adrenaline from the car park brawl was still coursing through the veins of the Bathie faction. Shaun McDermott was spotted at a nearby pub, the Hare and Hounds in West Ardsley. To an outside observer, he might have looked like a man in trouble. His shirt was stained with blood, but his demeanour told a different story. McDermott was in high spirits, buzzing with the thrill of the violence. Witnesses saw him in the pub car park, shadowboxing and reenacting the fight for his mates, boasting about how they had handled Patrick Doran. At the same time, 18-year-old Joshua Bathie was glued to his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he bragged about the beatdown to anyone who would listen. The digital footprint left behind during this hour would later become a crucial map of their intent. Joshua texted McDermott, fishing for validation, to which McDermott replied, "You smashed it," praising the teenager's role in the assault. Joshua fired back with a message that would haunt the defense team in court. "Bay boys, no matter what, it was a tribal declaration of loyalty, a confirmation that they saw themselves as a united front against an enemy." The Bathies and McDermott clearly felt the score had been settled in their favour. believing that a few punches and kicks had put Doran in his place. They were wrong. Patrick Doran was not the type to let a public humiliation go unanswered, and the gears of retaliation were already turning. After regrouping, Doran sought out his cousin William Price to help him strike back. Price was Doran's closest ally. The two had grown up together on the same family caravan site, sharing a bond that went deeper than friendship. When Price saw his cousin bloodied, bruised, and seething with anger, he did not ask questions. He agreed to confront the Bathie crew. However, they were smart enough to know that walking back into the christening venue outnumbered was a suicide mission. Instead, they looked for a more vulnerable target, a straggler they could isolate. That target was Shaun McDermott. McDermott had separated from the main Bathie group after the pub, heading to his home on Brewer Road in West Ardsley. He likely thought the day's drama was over. But shortly after 5:30 p.m, an Audi screeched to a halt outside his house. Inside were Patrick Doran and William Price, hunting for revenge. They found McDermott and attacked swiftly. While Price hung back to cover the exit, Doran charged. He was not looking for a fair fistfight this time. He was armed with a glass bottle. In a brutal hit-and-run assault, Doran smashed the bottle over McDermott's head, dazed, bleeding heavily from a scalp wound. And humiliated on his own doorstep, McDermott grabbed his phone. At roughly 5:45 p.m. he dialed Richard Bathie. The call was brief, urgent, and dripping with fury. Richard and Joshua, who were nearby, sped to McDermott's house. Neighborhood CCTV captured their arrival just before 6:00 p.m, documenting the terrifying shift in their demeanor. Joshua was seen kicking over traffic cones in the street. His face flushed red with rage, shouting, "Where the **** are they? I will kill the lot of them." His father, Richard, was equally incandescent. The brawl at the golf club had been a skirmish. This was now a war. Richard declared that if the targets had retreated to their family stronghold, the Bathies would bring the fight directly to their doorstep. The time for fists was over. Leaving McDermott's house in a state of collective fury, the Bathie men regrouped at their primary stronghold, Lowfold Farm on Woodhouse Lane. This location was key. It was more than just their home and livelihood, it was an arsenal. As long-time farmers, the Bathies held valid licenses for firearms used in pest control and sport. Buried deep within the farmhouse, under lock and key, was the means to turn this feud deadly. Around 6:20 p.m, the farm's own security cameras began recording the frantic mobilization of a militia. The footage, which would later be played in a hushed courtroom, depicted a scene of terrifying purpose. Richard Bathie, shirtless and fueled by adrenaline, is seen sprinting across the yard toward a large shed. He is not running for cover. He is running to his war machine. He clambers into the driver's seat of a huge yellow JCB telehandler, a piece of heavy agricultural equipment capable of lifting tons of earth. Now being commandeered as a battering ram, he fires the engine and aggressively backs the machine out, the heavy tires crunching over the gravel, ready to lead the charge. Simultaneously, Joshua Bathie disappears into the farmhouse. Moments later, he re-emerges, but the boy who had been texting his friends earlier is gone. In his hands he clutches an Italian-made double-barreled shotgun. It is a weapon designed to drop game birds at a distance, but in the hands of an enraged teenager on a vendetta, it is a tool of execution. Shaun McDermott is there too, hurriedly gathering additional weapons, including a machete. Investigators would later point to this specific window of time as proof that this was not a crime of passion in the traditional sense. This was a mission. They had to drive home, unlock the cabinets, load the weapons, and organize the vehicles. Every second was a choice to escalate. Yet not once did they pause to cool down. The convoy rolled out of the farm entrance shortly before 6:30 p.m, peeling onto the public roads like a military column, invading hostile territory. The sight must have been surreal to any passerby. A massive JCB tractor leading the way, its bucket raised like a shield, followed closely by a white Mercedes flatbed truck carrying the armed foot soldiers. As they raced toward Tingley, the red mist of rage had completely descended. They likely rationalized their actions with a twisted logic of family honor that they had to do this to protect their own. Richard Bathie would later claim in court that he only intended to scare Doran and Price, that the gun was just a prop to force them to back down. But you do not bring a loaded shotgun and a siege vehicle to a caravan park just to talk. During the drive, the convoy gained a fourth member, Edward Sr., a 25-year-old family friend who had been at the christening earlier, had been following the drama via text. Caught up in the excitement and loyalty to the Bathies, he joined the procession in his Ford Focus, trailing behind the heavy machinery. The die was cast. There was ample time during that drive miles of tarmac where they could have turned back, pulled over, or called the police. Instead, they pressed the accelerators to the floor, rushing toward a confrontation that would irrevocably destroy the lives of everyone involved. The Price family's caravan park was meant to be a sanctuary, a small, private gated yard near the M62 motorway where multiple generations lived together. On that summer evening, families were inside their mobile homes, believing they were safe behind their fences. That illusion of safety shattered at roughly 6:30 p.m. when the Bathie convoy roared into view. The massive yellow JCB did not just arrive. It invaded. Richard Bathie swung the heavy machine into the park's single entrance and killed the engine, parking it diagonally to block the gate. In an instant, the caravan site was transformed from a home into a cage. There was no way in, and more importantly, no way out. Witnesses would later recall the terrifying sight of Richard Bathie leaning out of the JCB's cab, his voice straining over the commotion as he screamed abuse at the residents. "You have had it this time," he bellowed repeatedly, his rage focused like a laser on Doran and William Price, as the echoes of his threats bounced off the metal siding of the caravans. The passenger door of the Mercedes truck flew open. Shaun McDermott jumped out, the double-barreled shotgun gripped tightly in his hands. He was followed by Joshua Bathie, who emerged wielding a machete. The air was instantly filled with the sounds of destruction. The intruders began swinging their weapons at anything within reach. Car windshields shattered, and caravan windows exploded inward, showering the terrified occupants with glass. Amidst this chaotic storm of flying debris and screaming children, Shaun McDermott raised the shotgun. The first boom echoed across the site, a warning shot fired into the air or a structure, signaling that the threats were no longer empty. Doran, despite the danger, rushed out to confront the attackers. He later told police that the moment the trio burst in, Joshua Bathie lunged at him with the machete, slashing wildly. Doran managed to dodge a fatal blow to the head, but he was forced onto the defensive, bleeding and scrambling to survive the blade. Simultaneously, William Price found himself staring down the twin barrels held by McDermott. Price's sister, watching in frozen horror from a nearby window, saw McDermott stride toward her brother with cold determination. William was unarmed. Desperate, he lunged forward in a frantic attempt to wrestle the weapon away, grabbing the barrels with his bare hands. A brief, terrifying struggle ensued, but McDermott retained control. He pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast tore into William Price's left arm at point-blank range. The damage was catastrophic. The shot shattered his elbow and mangled the flesh of his forearm, leaving the limb hanging uselessly by his side as he collapsed, screaming in agony. McDermott did not pause. He swung the weapon around, acquiring his next target, Doran, seeing the black holes of the barrels pivoting toward his chest. Doran instinctively threw up his right hand in a futile defensive gesture, palm out, as if to stop the bullets with sheer will. McDermott fired again. The blast hit Doran's raised hand, blowing off 3 of his fingers in a spray of blood and bone. The spread of the shot continued past his hand, penetrating his upper thigh and groin area, inflicting a grievous wound near his hip. As both men lay writhing on the ground, William Price's sister ran forward, screaming and pleading for mercy, begging McDermott to stop before he killed them all. Her cries seemed to break the trance. McDermott hesitated, lowering the smoking gun. The violence had peaked, but the silence that followed was filled with the groans of the maimed. Before fleeing the carnage they had just created, one of the attackers shouted a final warning to the shocked onlookers: "Do not go to the police." They wanted to enforce a code of silence, a traditional tactic in violent underworld feuds. But it was too late. The air was already thick with the sound of sirens approaching. The 3 attackers, joined by their accomplice, Edward Sr. in his Ford Focus, peeled out of the caravan park. Their destination was once again the Bathie family farm on Woodhouse Lane. But this was not a victory lap. It was a desperate race against time to scrub the scene clean. They knew the descriptions of the JCB and the flatbed truck would lead authorities straight to their door. Back at Lowfold Farm, the red mist of rage began to evaporate, replaced by the cold sweat of realization. They had attempted murder, and they had the weapon to prove it. Shaun McDermott handed the scorching hot shotgun to Edward Sr. As a family friend who had not pulled the trigger, Sr. was tasked with the disposal. He took the weapon to a remote corner of the farm's sprawling outbuildings, searching for a spot that police dogs might miss. He found a massive stack of hay bales, tightly wrapped in industrial plastic. Sr. shoved the shotgun deep into the gaps between the bales, burying it in the straw. He took the bag of spent and unspent cartridges and wedged them into the stack as well, to complete the cover-up. He gathered the blood-spattered clothing the attackers had worn and spirited it away. But the Bathies had made a critical error. They forgot their own surveillance system. When a major police operation descended on the farm shortly after, detectives treated the site as a crime scene for 2 counts of attempted murder. They seized the DVR recorders from the farmhouse. The footage was damning. It clearly showed the men arming themselves, leaving in a convoy, and returning to hide evidence. Armed with this digital witness, police arrested Richard Bathie, Joshua Bathie, and Shaun McDermott. However, the physical smoking gun remained elusive. Investigators spent 4 agonizing days scouring every inch of the sprawling farm property. They knew the gun was there. The CCTV proved it had not left the premises. Finally, the breakthrough came in the hayshed. Hidden deep within the stack, officers recovered the Italian double-barreled shotgun. Nearby, they found the stash of ammunition. But the forensic evidence did not stop at the weapon itself. The crime scene investigators found a distinct footwear impression left on the plastic wrapping of one of the hay bales, a footprint stamped in the dust by someone climbing up to hide the gun. That print was a perfect match for the boots worn by Joshua Bathie. The final piece of the puzzle was found in an innocuous traffic cone sitting on the property. Inside, stuffed out of sight, were Shaun McDermott's shoes. They were stained with the blood of Patrick Doran and William Price, DNA evidence that physically linked McDermott to the bloodshed at the Caravan Park. The cover-up had failed spectacularly. The Bathies had thought they could wash their hands of the violence, but they had left a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to a prison cell. The reckoning for the Bathie boys arrived at Leeds Crown Court in early 2022. Richard Bathie, Joshua Bathie, and Shaun McDermott stood in the dock, pleading not guilty to the charges of attempted murder. The defense strategy was a high-stakes gamble. Richard Bathie took the stand, attempting to spin a narrative that painted the armed invasion as a misunderstood act of self-preservation. He claimed he had no intention to kill, only to scare the Doran and Price families into backing off after alleged threats were made against his farm. He told the jury that the shotgun had discharged accidentally during a chaotic struggle, a tragic mishap rather than an execution. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled this story. They pointed to the sheer level of premeditation, the driving of heavy machinery to block exits, the arming of a convoy, and the use of lethal weapons. Most damning of all was the forensic reality of the shooting itself. Prosecutors argued that you cannot accidentally fire a double-barreled shotgun, break the barrel to reload it, and then fire again at a second person. The jury also heard the heart-wrenching testimony of William Price's sister, who described the terror of watching her brother being gunned down while she begged for their lives. The cold fact that the Bathies fled to hide the evidence rather than calling an ambulance for the men bleeding out in the dirt spoke louder than any defense speech. In March, the jury returned their verdict. They found Shaun McDermott, the man who pulled the trigger, guilty of attempted murder on both counts. The jury concluded he had every intention of ending the lives of Patrick Doran and William Price. Richard and Joshua Bathie were acquitted of attempted murder, but found guilty of Section 18, wounding with intent causing grievous bodily harm, a conviction that carries a severe penalty in UK law. All 3 were also convicted of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Edward Sr., having pleaded guilty earlier to perverting the course of justice, awaited his fate alongside them. In August 2022, the judge passed sentences that sent shockwaves through the community. Shaun McDermott was handed a staggering 34-year prison term. Richard Bathie received 21 years, a sentence that ensures the 53-year-old will spend his twilight years behind bars. His son, Joshua, just 19 years old at the time of sentencing, was given 15 years in a young offenders institution. The judge noted that while Joshua was influenced by his father, his enthusiastic participation in the violence required a severe punishment. Collectively, the trio was sentenced to 70 years of imprisonment. Edward Sr. received 30 months for his role in the cover-up. The feud is over, stamped out by the heavy hand of the law, but the cost was exorbitant. The Bathie family, once known as respectable farmers, has been decimated, their legacy, now, defined by a single hour of madness. On the other side, Doran and William Price live with permanent, life-altering injuries. Doran lost 3 fingers and suffers from PTSD, constantly looking over his shoulder. Price has lost the use of his arm, and lives in a state of perpetual anxiety. It is a grim reminder that in the world of violent feuds, there are no winners, only those who go to the hospital, and those who go to prison.